Today we'll be showing you how to install a commercial door pivot on a Kawneer commercial door. The part we'll be working with today is the 79-124 pivot that fits the Kawneer door. We'll be using the following tools for this project. To get started, disconnect the closer arm and the elbow using your Phillips screwdriver and your Prybar to separate the closer arms. Screw the attachment screw back into the closer arm so you don't lose it. With the arm disconnected, open the door up to access the pivot screws at the top header. The pivot is held into the frame with 3 screws in the top header. With your number 3 Phillips screwdriver, remove the screws. Normally, when you remove these screws, the top pivot slides out of the frame, but the Kawneer pivot has a groove in the top pivot which keeps the pivot in the header. You'll need to push up between the door and the pivot using your Prybar to separate the door and the frame pivot. Hold on to the door and lift it off the bottom threshold pivot. Next, remove the door portion of the pivots. Start with the bottom pivot. Remove the hex bolts and Allen screw from the existing pivot and backplate using a 7/16 wrench and the 3/16 Allen wrench. Remove the pivot and install the new door pivot, reversing the operation with the same size wrenches. Now, remove the top pivot and backplate from the door using the 7/16 wrench and 3/16 Allen wrench to remove the hex bolts and Allen screw. If you have an older style Kawneer door, you'll need to drill new holes at the top of the door to line up with the new hole locations for the newer pivot. To do this, mark the new hole locations using your tape measure and the new backplate to help in lining up the holes correctly. You want to line up 1/8 inch from the hinge side and 3/4 inch from the top edge. Now, tap it with your awl or center punch to make a drill mark and use your drill with a 1/8 or 3/16 inch drill bit as a pilot hole. This will guide the larger 7/16 inch drill bit to drill the new holes into the door. With your new holes drilled, you can install the new top pivot on the door using the backplate and 2 of the hex bolts. You will need the 1/2 inch wrench to install these larger size hex bolts. Look at the lower threshold pivot. If it is not worn, you might elect to leave the bottom pivot in place. If you do need to remove the pivot, you will also have to remove the threshold at the bottom. In some cases, these screws could be rusted in place, and you'll need to drill out the screws to remove them. The lower pivot has a leg that goes up into the lower side of the frame. You'll need to remove these screws. Slip the pivot leg out of the cutout in the frame. Install the new pivot, then reinstall the threshold. Next, install the new top frame pivot in the door header. With the new pivots installed in the door and frame, set the door onto the lower pivot in the threshold. These newer pivots have a spring-loaded pin at the top of the door, so all you need to do is compress the pivot point and then allow it to pop into the hole in the frame portion of the pivot. With the door back in the frame, you might need to adjust the pivots to the proper height so the door will operate smoothly. On the pivot set, you have two adjustments to raise the door. One adjustment is the threshold pivot. To adjust the lower pin, take your 3/4 inch wrench and turn it to achieve the proper height. The other adjustment is on the lower door pivot, which you can access by removing the cap screw with a slotted screwdriver. Take your 3/16 inch Allen wrench key and turn the adjustment screw clockwise to raise the door. Now you can reinstall the closer arm and check the door to make sure it opens and closes properly. Find these parts and more at Swissco.com.